if you're banking on your kids, please have that conversation with them candidly and make sure that they are darn well aware of that.
I think the other one is, I hope it all works out isn't the plan.
Yeah, hope is not a strategy. Yeah.
Information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up to date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions and answers to questions do not involve the rendering of personalized investment advice, but are limited to the dissemination of general information. A professional advisor should be consulted before implementing any of the options presented. Encompass More Asset Management LLC is a registered investment advisor with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission and only transacts business in states where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements.
Okay, one of the things that I have not been as passionate about that you are very passionate about, Dad, is long-term care planning. Not that I don't care about it or it's not on my radar or that I haven't done it with clients. I do work with, I think, some younger clients than you, but I haven't had the front row seat to long-term care and long-term care events that you have had between, grandma and grandpa or your parents, and a number of clients, right? Like you have a very unique perspective on this that a lot of advisors, I think, don't have, because you now have the wisdom of hindsight, not just in the initial planning, the execution, but then seeing how it all plays out and what are the results on the back end of it all. And so I think what we really need to dive into today is like, what is long-term care planning? What are the options for long-term care, right? Like what is long-term care? What are the options for it? And then how do you make a plan around funding that or paying for it, right? Like what is the planning component of that, right? So let's tackle, first bring everyone up to speed here, Dad. Like what is a long-term care event or what is long-term care?
So I think just naturally speaking, as you progress through your career, as you're younger, you're advising people, you just haven't seen a lot of the back end. You see the front end concept, but you don't see it in practice. So whether that's somebody passing away, somebody being disabled, or somebody having a long-term care event. So in particular, the long-term care event is an idea of really, if you look at retirement, a lot of people think of retirement as the, I'm going to travel. I'm not going to have to work anymore. I'm going to go golfing, whatever it is. It seems really fun. But then what happens is that it's that back end that, if you've seen anybody have a long-term care event, you really don't want to think too much about it. It's some pretty sad circumstances, aging, where things, especially if you're mental, there's probably two kinds. Your mental capacity is still there and your body deteriorates, or your body is in good shape and your mind deteriorates. And sometimes it's both. And so planning for long-term care is how you're going to age. And that has nothing to do with the funding of long-term care. That's just the planning. So does somebody want to stay at their house? Are they going to transfer to a facility? Are they going to need skilled nursing care? So somebody that's really going to cover loss of activities of daily living, such as bathing, eating, transferring, changing positions. There's 6 of those types of categories. And then there is loss of cognition. So it's very unfortunate that we think about it, but with medicine nowadays, they are able to, keep people alive longer. Life expectancies are lasting longer, and it's tough to age out. So my parents had a situation. Their health started to deteriorate probably in the mid 80s. Prior to that, there were some health issues that came up. It's not unusual for people to have a change of health probably when you start to get into your 50s. Things change and you might be moving around and still functioning, but maybe you're taking some prescriptions, you got some diagnosis, maybe you had some surgeries, whatever the case is. And when those things happen at an earlier age, When you roll that forward 10, 20, 30 years, it kind of takes away quality of life on the backside. So I think, again, in hindsight or working with people, I think the more people can keep up their bodies, their minds when they are earlier in age and pay attention to the things that crowd out in your daily life, that makes for a better quality life as you age. The health system nowadays too is a little bit tricky, where you can get services and what either your health insurance up to age 65 or Medicare or a supplement or the Advantage program. The funding side of things, a lot of people think that Medicare is going to take care of their long-term care issues. It doesn't. For most cases, there might be some coverage there, especially if you're being rehabbed, for a period of time after a hospital stay. But, if you need to go into a long-term care facility, something that has a memory care unit, those are typically private pay. And so you really have two choices on the backside when it comes to funding. You either start liquidating assets until you don't have any assets, in which case then Medicaid steps in. And I wouldn't say no assets. There are ways to plan around and save some of the assets in a Medicaid situation. Or the other is you don't liquidate assets, or you have the ability to have some type of insurance or assets or savings programs or something that you can draw from to pay for these additional expenses.
Yeah. So the first thing to really identify is like long-term care is when, not the day you retire, it's that last couple of years, right? It's statistically, it's at the end, right?
It's the back. It's the back half of retirement.
It's the back half, and like for a lot of people, hopefully, it's a way shorter amount of time than the back half, right? If you look at the if you retire at 65, you might not have that long-term care event till you're, in your late 80s or 90s, right? And not everyone ends up needing long-term care. But statistically, it's becoming more and more and more common, right? And so what that long-term care really is, in effect, is, hey, I'm having a hard time. I can't move around my house the same way, right? I can't make my own food, and I can't bathe myself or that sort of stuff, right? Like and there's stuff that people can put, like I've got a friend Blake here in town that he specializes in doing like remodels to help people as they start to have these needs. Like he does specialized remodels in their houses to maybe fend off some of the long-term care needs, right? Grab bars and paying attention to types of floorings and specialized showers and all that stuff. All that stuff comes into play. You kind of need that in the long-term care when it ends up happening, but it's when you need help, right? You need help getting in and out of the shower. You need somebody there with you. Or like you said, it's that cognitive, right? If mentally you're not there and able to take care of yourself the same way. And so now somebody has to sort of be with you, or you need that help. And that's what long-term care is like. And people will pretty much, like, they're going to need it or they won't, right? There's not much in between. But it's becoming, again, more and more common that they do need it. And so if you do need it, you already touched on what are the opportunities to have that, because there's some different categories of care. What does that look like?
I think what you mentioned, this whole idea of having an early discussion into retirement as to where you're going to live, and what those circumstances are going to look like. Is the house that somebody is currently in, if they're going to stay there, is it a 2-story? Can they move around if they need help? What does that layout look like? You can always, like your friend is adding grab bars and stuff, you can add that. We had added that in my parents' house, made some modifications to it. Two rails going upstairs. There's lifts you can get. So you can retro a house in pretty short order. But for some people, even the climate, if you have arthritis, there's certain types of things. There's, do you want to live in a place that it's cold all the time, or maybe a place that's warmer is better? So these are all things that can be thought of when you're thinking about the traveling and stuff. You think about the backside as to where these things are going to happen.
So there's like three big categories, right? Of like what does that care look like? And it's, care at your house. And that's typically, the most premium option, right? Like that's most desirable. Most people envision it when they think about it. They think like, yeah, it'd be really nice if I could just stay at home and somebody comes and helps me out, right? And then like the more common option is the home, right? The retirement home, that nursing home. You go somewhere else that they have the care there, right? And that's a different cost. And then the last is, kind of the last option people want, and that's Medicaid. And that's where you're going into a facility that's, owned and run by and operated by the state and paid for by the state. And, I did get to see the quality difference between your parents, where they did have quality, they had a high quality of care that was at home. There's people there all the time, always helping them. And grandma and grandpa stayed in their own house till the very last day, and alternatively, mom's mom, my Nana, Medicaid, right? And what that kind of facility looked and felt like, and what did that, and I can tell you without no doubt in my mind, if you have the resources to plan for one of the first two options, you really don't want Medicaid. Most people are not going to want that option, if at all possible. And if you don't believe me, find a Medicaid facility near you and go tour it.
That's what I love to do is if people aren't sure what the system is or they haven't experienced this, go take a couple tours and you'll be surprised, and it will help you decide the kind of care you might want to have. In the case of your Nana, that was a very good Medicaid facility, but even a very good Medicaid facility, they're short on people, resources are limited. It's a tough situation. My parents, they wanted to have care at their home. They always had this plan to stay home, but again, hadn't really thought through a lot of the home modifications that would be needed. My dad had developed, as you know, Parkinson's. And so I think that the thing that really hurts a lot of people is not looking at the situation they have and making changes to their house. So they still had the rugs out in front of the house. It's a trip hazard, right? So there's things that you can do early on that, maybe you got to have a little more dust in your house. But the one thing that really does a lot of people in as far as changing their health circumstances, they might have mobility, they might be doing all right. But if you fall and you break a hip or you break a shoulder, there's only a 3 in 10 chance that you're going to make it past a year, just because the issues that come along with that breakage or the surgery itself. And so that you can really change your long-term care needs very quickly. Things spiral out of control. Another one that really is tricky is the cognitive issue. If somebody has Alzheimer's, dementia, a spouse can help with that for a while. And maybe that's a year or two. It depends on somebody's constitution, on how good they are and they can handle it. But when somebody has those conditions, their personality changes, and oftentimes they become agitated because of the state they're in themselves. And so it's hard for a spouse to work with a spouse that's out of character, and there's things happening. And so then that's usually a time where either there's burnout or I can't handle this, and we need to put mom or dad into a facility to get professional help. And to make sure that they're not going to hurt themselves, they're not going to wander out of the house, they're not going to break something, and so that can change. And when you look again at the cost of these type of programs, if you want to have care in your house, I talk to a lot of people, and we talk about maybe a part-time situation, especially when there is a spouse that's getting burnt out. Why don't you maybe think about bringing in someone to help get you out of the house for 4 hours a couple days a week or something? Care when you're bringing it to your house can be, $25 to $35 an hour. And if it's on overtime, it's more than that. Overtime includes holidays, weekends, that kind of stuff. So if you add that up and take it times, maybe 7 hours a day, or just a couple times a week, it could be a couple $1,000s. It could be $6,000 or $7,000 a month.
Yeah.
So it adds up quick. And now we're talking about part-time at home.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to full-time at home, and really what really changes for people is when they lose incontinence. So if you can't toilet yourself, and you need someone to help you, that's really goes from part-time to full-time. You need someone there 24 hours a day. And now take 24 hours a day times $25 to $35 an hour. And it's easy to ring up $250,000 to $300,000 a year in care expenses, to have it at home. So if most people want care at home, this is the kind of money that they got a provision either to draw off their assets or have some type of, insurance or asset-based program that's going to help pay for this, in addition to like Social Security, pension, the normal type of stuff that they were drawing from anyways.
Yeah.
The tragic part is can you imagine if two people, they live a long life together, and then somebody has this long-term care event, and their net worth they don't have any protection. They just start drawing off assets, and they take care of the one spouse that needed the care. Mm-hmm. But then the caregiver, who had a big heart, helped the spouse through all this, or a family member, and then there's nothing left for them. Yeah. So they get the Medicaid program. Yeah. After all of this experience themselves. I think with a little bit more discussion by people, that can be a better outcome for both people in the family and for the children. Because what a lot of people, they haven't talked about this inside their family, and the parents might think, well, I have a son or a daughter that's in the medical field and they'll help take care of me, or I got this family member that can help. And what happens is you change the relationship of, maybe you were a son or a daughter and you had this relationship with mom or dad, and now it's really not a son or daughter, mother-father relationship. It's a caregiver relationship, and that's a different ballgame. And so what happens is that at the end of life, it becomes not fun for anybody. It's not fun for mom or dad. It's not fun for the kids. Everybody's doing what they can just to make the best out of a bad situation that could have been planned for far in advance.
Yeah. It risks killing the legacy.
Absolutely. People don't understand the risk that they're taking by not having this plan, a plan and a way to fund a plan based on what their desires are.
Well, you're not even saying like it's not even just the risk of the, you're not running the risk of damaging the legacy from a financial perspective alone, right? Of hey, I didn't have a good plan for this, so now we blew through all the assets. But it's also like, man, if you're having to literally, take care of your parents going to the bathroom the last 3-4 years they're alive, and that's time away from, you spending time with your own kids and working your career and, making money and making your stuff happen. And this time that you do spend with mom and dad at the end wasn't visiting with them and trying to reminisce and, focusing on passing on the human life values that they have, but instead it was helping them shower and bathe. That's like this is not the way that most people want to be remembered. But there's that old saying, right? The last impression is the lasting impression, and I think that's the risk that some people take when they, just like, oh, my kids will take care of me, or, I get my whatever.
I mean, you got to have kids that have a lot of constitution and capacity to handle that situation. And I'll tell you that we were able to bring the care into the house. And so the relationship that I had was still, even though there was a lot of caregiving, it wasn't the day-to-day caregiving because we had caregivers. And so the time for me was a little bit more sweet in that, it was talking about life events or remembering or trying to, share something positive that happened with the kids or the grandkids or whatever. That was good. But I can see in other families where it's not that, and it's a different experience. I mean, I've got friends right now that are really frustrated with the situation that their parents are in. And again, a little bit more planning. And even if you do a lot of planning, it can still be frustrating, and we don't know in life what is going to be dealt our way. And sometimes I will say that when you look back on it, if you have the proper care and a proper plan, you should be able to look back on it and say that was a sweet time. It was hard. It was difficult to carry those bricks in the backpack, but I'm glad that I helped my parents exit in a very dignified, loving manner. And I would say that I'm very grateful for the caregiving company that we worked with, over the years. And there was some tough times, there really was, but there was some great times as well. And friendships were made. We couldn't have done it without them. And so it's almost like when your parents go through this, from my perspective, you got to have a tribe to help out. And my siblings, everybody helped out in a different way. And this is, again, part of the planning. Some of the siblings were remote. And so they would call. And so they would kind of be that voice of reason and security for parents. It helped them, even though they were remotely, feel really good about what they could do and work their life. My brother would fly in from out of town and give us, a week or two off where we could go and visit family or go on a trip or just get away from the situation. Respite is what they would call that. So you can kind of reset and dive back in. But respite is really, really important for caregivers. And by caregivers, I mean the family, whoever's playing that role.
Yeah.
Even caregivers, if they're from a professional company, they need time away too. Can you imagine doing that for 40 hours a week? I mean, these people have the hugest hearts, the best personalities. They're like God's angels that he sends down to help families. But you know what? There's not enough people in that business. And generally speaking, the people in that business probably could use a higher level of compensation for the level of care and responsibility that they're given on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about funding options, because you have so on one hand, I've Nana, mom's mom, no funding options, right? Medicaid was the funding option. Your parents, my grandma and grandpa, self-funded, right? And they were very fortunate that, grandpa was a wise steward, self-made man and wide steward of his assets. And they could afford that for what felt like a very, very, very long time. And then I think you, observing those two situations, have chosen a different route that is in the middle. And that's having a long-term care insurance plan. And that itself breaks out into two different categories. There's what I would refer to as kind of the old long-term care insurance plan that I think that's what got us such a bad name. I've seen those policies. I think they're horrendous for people. I think when they were sold, the actuaries did not anticipate the cost of long-term care that it was going to actually be when people filed the claims. And so they did build in the premiums to be adjustable over time. And so as people have gotten older and not needed it, it's becoming unreasonably expensive for them. And so I have clients that have, you have to weigh it out. Do we cancel a long-term care policy? or do we not? And at what point is kind of the break even, right? And there's some really tough analysis to do there. That's really hard to quantify, because at the end of the day, like long-term care event could start tomorrow, right? But there is a newer maybe version. It's been around for a number of years now, but where the insurance contract is structured quite a bit different. They call it asset-based or linked benefit. And that long-term care program, maybe give people, you did mention kind of what the cost looks like if you fund it yourself, and we kind of know what Medicaid looks like. Give the overview really quick on the funding source you've chosen. Obviously, not talking about which company, has a contract. I don't think we need to get into that, but just functionally, how does because you can speak from experience here, right?
I mean, that's a good question, and there are options for people. And again, I've been doing this for a while, and the issue, I think, back, if you go back 30, 40 years ago, I think the actuaries for traditional long-term care probably got the underwriting wrong. And so premiums, adjustable premiums have gone up. And benefits, if you've had a program from a long time ago, they haven't inflated the way the medical costs have inflated. Mm-hmm. And again, that becomes more problematic with not enough people in the business. So there's that form, traditional long-term care. That's similar to auto insurance. If you don't use it, you just lose it. You don't get a benefit. I've not been a fan of that type of a program over the years, although it's available. Another way is to buy a life insurance contract that has a long-term care rider on it, a critical illness rider, or a terminal illness. Those are kind of three levels. And just terminal illness would mean you could accelerate the death benefit if you're terminally ill, very short term, very catastrophic situation. A critical illness would be where you have lost activities of daily living, or a critical, you've had a cognitive impairment and you can't be rehabbed from it. Mm-hmm. Again, so it might be a little bit longer in time, but you're not coming back from it. A full long-term care rider on a life insurance contract generally says, if you qualify, but then you can be rehabbed from it. So this might maybe be a level if somebody was in an accident, had a care for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, mm-hmm. they might be able to engage at, stop it, continue on with the program. It's a little bit more robust as far as the coverage goes. So those are the types of riders that you can get on life insurance. And certainly there's different, they're typically permanent life insurance contracts, a couple different flavors on those. We won't get into all that today, but it was focused on the long-term care piece. So that's kind of, that is a lot of life insurance. But if you're accelerating the death benefit for long-term care, then it's not there for death benefit anymore. So you got to kind of remember that when you're adding that to a policy.
And that's generally like just a highlight, like when insurance agents say our insurance is different because we have living benefits on our policies. Like generally, basically every insurance company offers some flavor of those riders. So it's kind of always, I always chuckle at that. That's not a differentiator for insurance agents that they offer something with living, quote unquote living benefits.
Well, and it matters who's paying, if you're paying extra for the rider or not, because some include it and some add, but even at an addition, again, you're paying for the value, right?
Right. But then doing asset-based long-term care, like that really changes the dynamics when you don't just have a long-term care rider on a life insurance contract. It's really the focus of the contract isn't providing that death benefit. It isn't providing the life insurance. It is a chassis by which you are going to fund a long-term care program.
Yeah.
Right? Oftentimes
they're called a linked benefit program, but it primarily has large long-term care and low death benefit. Yep. And so it's kind of the inverse of the life insurance program, where it's high life insurance and maybe lower leverage on the long-term care piece. A linked benefit program, I think it's interesting. A lot of people don't know about it. It's more like saving for your retirement plan into a 401k. And so you can pay a lump sum into this type of a program. You can pay over 5 years, 10 years. So flexible payment. What you do is you put money away into this linked benefit long-term care, asset-based long-term care program.
Yeah.
And what it does is it leverages your money over time. So let's say a person puts, over 10 years, $60,000, $70,000 into a program, and there's an inflation rider on a benefit. You could have a pool of 5, 10, 12 times your cost, depending on the age. You're looking forward 20, 30 years, but that benefit keeps inflating out the longer you don't use it. I think people that I've shared this idea with, they've liked that, but then the question is, well, what happens if I don't need long-term care? Or what if something happens to me, what did my family get? And so what they get is they typically get the premiums that you put back in as a death benefit back. to the beneficiaries. And so it typically there's typically, if somebody just wants to cancel it in the future, there's some type of a cash surrender to the program as well. So there's multiple ways that you can get paid out. That feels pretty comfortable with people. It's like a retirement plan. You're going to be able to get that money out one way or another over time. And so that is definitely an interesting way to fund and leverage your money for a specific long-term care event, especially good for families where there is Alzheimer or dementia in the family, or parents are going into their 90s or even past. Likely there's going to be costs, and you need a benefit that's inflating out. What's nice about those too is that the premiums really don't change, right? You're going to pay for a specific amount of time, or a lump sum, or a 10-year certain, or whatever. You're going to pay. It's not going to go up. Just the benefit's going to go up. Two things about the benefit. Two major things is, one is a reimbursement program and one is an indemnity program. So a reimbursement program says you need to submit a bill from an institution or a professional or someone to qualify to be reimbursed from the policy. The other type of policy is indemnity based. So an indemnity policy is like, if you lose the 2 activities of daily living, or you have of the 6 or have cognitive impairment, the insurance company is now going to qualify and send you the check, and you can do whatever you want with it. So if you've got family members that are helping that aren't professionals, you can pay them, or you can do anything else you want with the money. It's not reimbursement. Typically that's the better benefit, but it also costs a little bit more typically. But again, there's really good companies out there that are insurance companies that offer this. You can see, each one has a little bit nuances, even though we've kind of explained them in general. It's good to work with an independent broker that has access to multiple insurance companies so that you can find the program that works well for you. And you got to remember, the quality or strength of the insurance company is really important, because this benefit may not pay off for 20, 30, 40 years, and you're going to need it when you need it. So you can't have some fly-by-night insurance company or someone that's not going to be solvent over the long haul. So those are really important elements to consider when you're making a selection to find what program fits you the best.
Yeah, people forget about that sometimes with insurance contracts, is that you have a contract with them, and the guarantees are only as good as them being able to pay. And if the insurance company fails, you get nothing, right? There is no, FDIC on that, right? And so you do have to be really cautious around that. And the other thing that I think people forget about those sometimes too is that, remember that when you have a contract. So this is the same problem that people have as bond investors, is that you now have a contract and it's denominated in US dollars, which, hey, nothing too wrong with the mighty US dollar, but it's just something to be aware of from an inflation standpoint, maybe, right? Like, you don't want to get your benefit paid out in inflated dollars, right? 40 years from now. So you want to really take that into consideration. I'm a portfolio, I'm an arithmetic of portfolio guy. And so the way that I think about this when I do is I view it as a hedge. It's a reasonable hedge. And so what does it hedge against? It's a hedge against, if you have the big, long-term care event, you get the big payout, right? But if you don't, you kind of get you get the cost of the hedge back, right? In form of death benefit to beneficiaries. And so your real cost then is just opportunity cost, which is, as far as hedges go, is kind of cheap. When you look at, so you're kind of hedging your estate, if you will, as a whole, with that. And I think that's what that has always been the appropriate use case of insurance, right?
That hedge applies to a spouse, to make sure the second spouse has left, or let's say that if there's a single person that would like to leave something to their children, there's a hedge there. And again, when you're talking about hedging too, you're really deciding how much risk you want to take in your situation, right? And so within this applies to any insurance, whether it be life, disability, long-term care, car, whatever, home. The amount of you are going to decide if you don't have any insurance, the risk is there, but you're self-funding it. The risk doesn't change. You just have it. So you can also try to take something and shift all the risk to an insurance company and say, you take all the risk. Well, that can be pretty expensive. So, large life insurance without this analysis, this gap analysis between self-insurance and full insurance, usually somebody wants to be somewhere in the middle. Like
Sure.
I'm willing to pay for some insurance to hedge my risk.
Yeah.
And I think that is really important for people to consider this type of gap analysis or hedge analysis, but be able to project it forward, not just in the next year or two.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe your car, your home insurance, that's maybe a shorter term. But longer term is this long-term care, because that's probably out the farthest. But I think if you think of it, unless we have an accident or something happens prematurely, most of us are going to experience this. And if you look around in your peer group, or if you're younger, your parents or your grandparents' peer group, these things are pretty common. And so you just kind of the younger you are, you got to really open up to these ideas. They're down the road. The sooner you get a solution in place and a plan in place, the more that the power of money can work for you over the long haul. And two, if you're getting an insurance or risk protection plan in place, if it's a larger program, you don't have to put it all with one insurance company. There might be two that fits, or maybe one for one spouse, because these are all underwritten programs, right? You've got to qualify.
Yeah.
And so one spouse, based on their situation, a company might have an appetite for that risk, and then split it and go with another spouse, another direction. So now you have two insurance companies. Yeah. There's also programs where you can insure on a joint. So you share a pool. That can be cost effective in some situations. So there's a lot of options out there to consider, and hopefully you can find somebody, again, that's an independent, that represents a number of companies, and that has some expertise in the arena, so that they can help you paint that picture of what the future looks like, and then bring it back to today.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a heavy topic, but it's something that I think the more people take the time to think through it more thoroughly, right in the present. People that know me personally or work with me know that I'm not the biggest insurance fan, right? Like I don't seek to give the insurance companies more money than I ever need to. I think a lot of it can be misused and oversold. And I think there are some concerns that when done incorrectly, you end up with, something that you thought was going to pay and it doesn't. And that's the worst, and all this kind of stuff. But there is value in thinking through the long-term care piece sooner rather than later. And I like what you said in particular around the sooner you have the plan in place, the sooner money can work for you and not against you. And I think that's really the ending thought is, visit your plan. It doesn't have to be an insurance contract, but you should have some kind of plan, whether it's identifying, which rental property you're going to sell, or how you're going to, re-leverage the home on a reverse mortgage to pay for it, or whatever it may be, right? There are options, right? But, if you're a single person, think about it. If you're a couple, talk about it with your spouse, have that plan and have the good expectation and understanding, right? And if you're banking on your kids, please have that conversation with them candidly, and make sure that they are darn well aware of that. Because I think we beat the dead horse on that one a little bit, but
I think the other one is, I hope it all works out isn't the plan.
Yeah. Hope is not a strategy. Yeah.
Absolutely.
We'll appreciate you taking the time, Dad. Obviously you're a busy guy yourself. So
one other thing that I wanted to mention, just the tie-in with this long-term care planning to the estate and trust planning, because if somebody becomes incapacitated or they need help, especially with their cognition, they need someone to step in on a power of attorney or as a trustee of a trust. So I just wanted to mention that this is a very close relationship between the estate and trust planning and the long-term care planning.
Yep.
So people consider both sides of that.
So I tell people, financial planning is not about picking the right mutual fund. That's a piece, right? But tying together that estate plan, the insurance planning, the long-term care planning, the tax planning around it, right? There's maybe tax considerations to be involved with the long-term care planning, the income planning, all of that. It all ties together and makes it comes together for a good financial plan, right?
Strategy and plan. That's where it's at.
Yeah. So, well, it's been real and it's been fun, Dad.
It's great.
And today,
thanks
it
for
has
the
been real
invitation.
fun. Okay.